All right. Welcome from Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates. It is now 4:40 p.m. my time. Your time is either 1 or 2 hours behind me, so we're all in the same time zone. Welcome to Basics of Authentic Assessment. I'm anticipating this session to run as long as 2 hours, but I'll probably do some very fast talking to try to make it shorter. I do have a lot of slides with a lot of text on this one, and I'll let you know why that is in just a second. For the purpose of the video, for anyone who's watching the video, I'm showing I logged in as a participant, and you're looking at the participant window where the people who are here in the session are interacting on their own windows, and I'm showing some of their results. And if you join my sessions in future, you're going to be doing a lot of interactive stuff. And so hopefully we'll have some fun and exchange some interesting ideas and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So without further ado, let me introduce myself. I know you all know me, but for the video, I'm going to introduce myself again. My name is Larry Davies. In addition to my doctorate, which is 10 years ago, thank you very much. Actually, my doctorate is in educational leadership, where I learned to stay away from educational leadership. And my SFHEA means I'm a senior fellow of the Higher Education Academy, which is a British organization that gives out fellowship. Well, doesn't give out, you have to write. I won't even talk about that. Writing my SFHEA was more difficult than writing my doctoral thesis, believe it or not. They give out fellowships and senior fellowships for teachers in higher education. The focus is on teaching and supporting learning all across all disciplines. I think all of you today who are attending are English teachers, but I work with teachers all across the curriculum in the college that I work in. It's a really interesting certification, but it's only for higher education. And if you want to know more about that, you're welcome to email me and I'll send you to their website and you can think about writing a fellowship. And I do a lot of coaching, so I can coach you on how to write your fellowship. So with that said, nice to meet you. Knowledge is power. Let's get into the power part. And again, I want to know where you're coming in from, even though I know all of you and you already know this activity. Hang on. Here it is. Okay. So, excuse me. So I'm doing this presentation in Nearpod. Nearpod is a highly interactive platform that I highly recommend for teachers who have to teach online. Right now, I want to know where you are in the world. So on the screen, at the bottom of this screen, you can see 5 black circles, and one is highlighted blue. That's the pencil one that's highlighted. Then you have your highlighter, which is next, and I'm doing this on my participant screen now. Then there's the text tool, then there's the upload graphic tool, and then there's the eraser in case you draw and you want to erase. What I'd like you to do is use the pencil tool right now, choose a nice color. I'm going to choose red, and I'm going to make it really small with my slider. You can see it's making big, small. I'm going to make it pretty small. And then because I'm in Abu Dhabi, I'm going to color a circle right around Abu Dhabi. I know it's a tiny world map, but that's to indicate where I am. And I'd like you to do the same thing, please. Let me know where you are in the world by coloring in where you are. And I know you were all here from last session, but again, these are separate videos, so I want to just do that pretty quickly. And just to make sure that you this is mainly to practice using this tool because we are going to use this tool a couple times. And Elaf, this is your first time using it, so if you need some help, I can help you. Again, at the bottom of your screen, you want to click the pencil, and then the color will come up. You can choose a color, any color is fine. And then you can click the pencil again so it goes away, and then you can draw on your screen. So I could just...
Thank you. I did it, but I'm getting disconnected from time to time, so I'm missing some part of what you are saying. So I hope I hope I did the correct thing.
Let's check. We're going to pop yours out and see what happened. See if anything shows up. Okay, I don't see anything on there, but all right. It's probably the connection is having some problems. That's fine. Okay, next I want to, I don't really need to do this one with you because you've done this before. This is giving me your email address for your certificate of attendance. I already have that from all of you from the last one, so I'm just gonna skip over that. And thanks to your feedback in the last session, I want to do this again, which is assess yourself as an online teacher. How experienced would you say you are teaching live online sessions? You have just 50 seconds to answer. I'm a novice. I'm just starting to learn this. I don't really understand it. I'm an apprentice, starting to get through it. I'm a practitioner. I can mostly do it by myself. I'm an expert. I understand it well. I can thoroughly teach everyone. I'm going to do D because I'm an expert, and then on my screen I'm going to click that big blue submit button in the lower right corner so that I've submitted my poll answer to you. Okay, everybody has answered. So we have the whole gallery of people. Everybody chose at least one answer. So we go from me, the one expert, and we have one person who rates as being a complete novice. And 3 of you are right in the middle. So that's good information. I hope, again, while using Nearpod, I'll try to talk about some things that I'm doing. You're welcome to interrupt me with questions at any time through the session. Okay. All right, let's start with this. What do you think? This woman is a human resources person. This guy wants a job, and she asks him, I see you did well in school, but what real world skills do you have? And his answer is tests. I can take tests. What do you think about this? And again, you're welcome to open up your mic, or you can type in the chat, or you can choose not to respond at all.
Yeah, problem is parents more than kids. I think that the parents only are interested in the evaluations dictated through tests, and when I give them feedback on they might need to learn how to take notes better or they need to improve their collaboration skills, it just goes in one ear and out the other. But the moment you give them a grade, then about whatever you've assessed, because grades depending on collaboration and critical thinking skills don't seem to go down well, then either they're very happy because the grades are good, or they're not happy and they want to criticize the tests.
I have a feeling that is an issue that will never ever go away. As much as we would like it to go away, will it ever go away? We don't know. I would say stick in there though, because real world experience is gaining some traction, I think. So you're talking about the challenge of educating parents, which is something maybe that's a good topic to address. But again, I tend to work in higher education, so I don't deal with parents as much, or our teachers don't deal with parents as much. Yeah. Someone else, I think, wants to say something.
Well, I believe it's not only the parents who are really interested in marks, because whenever you suggest something to the students, the first question is, will it be tested? Are we going to get a mark out of this? Because in that case, I will sort of try hard. Otherwise, I will probably not bother too much. And I'm experiencing this even especially now, because obviously in this condition we are sort of invited to analyze the process rather than the results. And students keep asking me this question, even though they know that okay, they will pass this year and that the mark is not so relevant, but still they seem to I don't know if it is because they want sort of their performance to be assessed, or if because they are obsessed by tests after a life of tests? I don't know. I don't know the answer.
I don't think there is a good answer either, except that I guess it kind of starts in middle school, doesn't it? Where testing begins. And then that becomes kind of the status quo on finding out if people are learning or not. And it's really hard to get away from that, especially because there is this performance mindset versus a mastery mindset. And again, that's probably a topic I'm going to talk about a little bit more, which is mindsets and performance versus mastery. Everybody wants to be in competition with everybody else and get the highest grades because that means something. But, I have a doctorate. Maybe I got really bad grades as a doctor, but I still have DR, so people think, okay, wow, doctorate. It's the same with having a bachelor's degree or a master's degree. In the end, nobody really cares about your grades, so why does it matter? I don't really have an answer for that. But I think it is in our best interest as teachers to try to break this paradigm of tests being the only thing that determines learning. And so that's why I'm here today to talk about basics of assessment. So here's my outcomes for this session. Hopefully by the end, you're going to be able to define 3 types of assessment. To define and illustrate task assessment, which is going to be the big stuff, and I'm going to try and pack that down. And then we're going to look at rubric assessment, assessing with rubrics, and I have one small sample because of the time. And then we'll do a very quick overview of 3 different types of portfolio assessment. Okay. I want to start here. Sorry, Janine, you want to say?
No, sorry.
You just got the microphone. Okay. So I want to start with a very short explanation of Bloom's taxonomy. Instead of asking if you know Bloom's, I just want to review it very quickly. This was something that was started by a team of academics back in 1956, led by Dr. Benjamin Bloom, and they wanted to create a common language for teachers when it came to talking about how people learn. They published 3 volumes, one about how the brain contributes to learning, number 2 was about how emotions and feelings contribute, and number 3 is how the body contributed to learning. Most academics picked up on volume 1, which was the cognitive domain of learning. And the cognitive domain, what they published became kind of mainstream in academia, especially for learning outcomes more than anything else, and determining good learning outcomes. And this concept of higher order thinking skills and lower order thinking skills that you see on the left side here, that little, I like to represent this as a continuum with a lever. In 2001, another team took the old Bloom's taxonomy and they revised it. Hence, you see Bloom's revised taxonomy here. And in the revised taxonomy, they relabeled some things and they redid a graphic to show that the higher order thinking skills are kind of equal to each other. So we have remembering and understanding, because I put them in yellow to show that they kind of belong to each other. And these are what are considered the lower order thinking skills. Remembering is just recall of information. Understanding is making connections of basic piece of information. And then we get into applying, which is kind of a middle way between lower order thinking skills and higher order thinking skills. Think of applying as basic problem solving. That is taking information you know and the connections you have and solving a problem with that. And then the 3 higher order thinking skills, which were originally thought of as hierarchical to each other, with analyzing being the lowest of the 3, evaluating being the highest, and creating being in the middle in the original taxonomy. In the revised taxonomy, it was changed that all 3 are kind of the same. And again, analyzing is kind of the opposite of understanding, where you're pulling something apart to see the connections. Evaluating is judging, usually based on some kind of criteria, and then creating, which in some representations of Bloom's is shown to be the highest of higher order thinking skills. That is making something new from all the information that you've learned and memorized and the connections you've made and basic applications and pulling it apart again and judging criteria, but making something new out of all of that information. But I really prefer this graphic that shows the three highest order thinking skills kind of equivalent to each other because they do kind of happen back and forth to each other. So this lever on the left side, the higher order, lower order thinking skills, think of it as a moving lever because I'll be showing this graphic on a lot of the slides coming up to represent either this thing we're looking at is more of a lower order thinking skill or higher order, or it's somewhere in the middle. So the lever, think of it, I guess, as a thermometer gauge, moving up and down. Okay, so, and again, this applies to a lot of the slides coming up, so hopefully we'll be able to do it. One other thing here, this is something that you probably should have for reference. So if you click this, this should open in a new browser. This is a new representation of Bloom's revised taxonomy as something called the pedagogy wheel. This is more of a resource for today if you're more interested in digging deeper into Bloom's taxonomy, but I highly recommend you look at this page and download the PDF version of the graphic, the big wheel, because as an online teacher, it's called pedagogy, not pedagogy, because it's based on using apps for your iPad. That's pad comes to the iPad, or any other tablet, any other tablet computer you might have. And it aligns lots of apps, either Android or iOS apps. It aligns these with the 6 levels of Bloom's taxonomy and includes many, many verbs that are aligned and many, many activities that you can do that are aligned with each of the 6 levels. It's a huge international work that originated out of, I think, Perth, Australia. The gentleman's, I don't know his name off the top of my head. Oh, here it is, Alan Carrington. He started this project, I think, as long as 10 years ago, and I know that there are versions I know there's an Arabic version. I don't know if there's an Italian version or not, but it has been translated into about 12 different languages. So I highly recommend that. Okay. I'm just going to move past that graphic. Now, everything I am talking about today is basically coming from, this is another resource web page. So you can click this and this will open this page to something called the Authentic Assessment Toolbox. This topic is interesting to me because I actually was able to do a workshop with this man. His name, Dr. My brain stopped working. Dr. Muller, I think it is. So he put this together. So what I have for you today basically is I've taken his work and I've tried to distill it down to some of the really basic concepts as much as possible. So, but you'll want to dig a little more deeply into his website. He's got some really great resources here. Basically, I'm just trying to get you interested in the topic, and then you have to do your own research based on this website. So again, most of my materials I've taken from this website. And one of the first things that I thought was interesting, he had a couple of quotes, including one from him. So I'm going to read these. I know there's a lot of words on the slide, but I'm going to read this because we're going to talk about authentic assessment. And he writes, assessment in which students are asked to perform real-world tasks that demonstrate meaningful application of essential knowledge and skills. This is his definition of authentic assessment. Then he also has from Wiggins, and Wiggins is of Wiggins and Teig fame for understanding by design, which is like backwards instructional design. I also highly recommend their book. And again, you might want to write to me about that if you need that resource. So Wiggins says that authentic assessment is engaging in worthy problems or questions of importance in which students must use knowledge to fashion performances effectively and creatively. The tasks are either replicas of or analogous to the kinds of problems faced by adult citizens and consumers or professionals in the field. I wish he wrote in the real world, but okay, same difference. And Stiggins, 1987, performance assessments call upon the examinee to demonstrate specific skills and competencies, that is, to apply the skills and knowledge they have mastered. I'm going to use these words a lot. I'm going to use the word skill, competence, and knowledge a lot in the slides that are coming up, because I like to think in those three terms when we talk about teaching and learning and assessing teaching and learning. And sorry, I'm going to just turn the sound off on my phone. So you're going to see a lot of these words coming up in these slides. And again, this presentation, I have a lot of slides with a lot of words, so I will try to get through them as quickly as I can. So we're going to look at three types of authentic assessment today. We're going to look at task assessment, rubric assessment, and portfolio assessment. We're going to spend most time on task assessment and a little time on rubric assessment and even little time on portfolio assessment, just to give you a taste of all of them. So let's jump into task assessment. Oh, and now, sorry, I'm going to delay and do something fancy and strange. Give me just a moment here. I can't do this seamlessly. I wish I could. Ready? Okay, there, my background changed to task assessment. Was it worth the wait? I hope so. Okay, so let's talk about task assessment while I hide all the windows that I'm jogging around. Okay, so Muller's basic definition is task assessment is designed to assess the ability to apply standard-driven knowledge, skill, and competence to real-world challenges. I like to highlight the verbs that align to Bloom's taxonomy, so that's why I put apply here. So already we're thinking, you need to think of authentic assessment as something that's at the higher levels, the higher order thinking skills parts of Bloom's taxonomy. And then he had this nice chart, so we're going to look at all of these. He compares 5 aspects of traditional assessment to 5 aspects of authentic assessment. And I would say that the traditional assessment are all his conclusion basically as these traditional assessments really assess mostly lower order thinking skills, or they tend to just be of lower order in terms of the amount of information we're able to pull out of the type of assessment it is. And then the authentic assessments tend to be more higher order because they're a lot more complex and it's a lot easier to see what they're all about. So I'm going to look at these one by one. So first we're going to look at in a traditional assessment like a test, you ask students to select a response, whereas in authentic assessment, you ask them to perform a task. And he says that authentic assessments ask learners to demonstrate understanding. I use this phrase all the time, demonstrate understanding, especially in outcomes. So to demonstrate understanding by performing a more complex task, usually representative of more meaningful application. Again, there's that word application. Bloom's taxonomy, somewhere in the middle to higher order thinking skills. And let me just talk about the phrase demonstrate understanding, because I've had these debates in the past 4 years with some teachers at my college saying, understand is a great verb to use in a learning outcome. And I will say to them, understand is not a measurable thing, but you can measure if they can demonstrate understanding through doing something. Because you can't see understanding happening in the brain. You can only see a demonstration of it through a performance of something. And it's not a small difference. I think it's a very big difference. And Muller here, I definitely agree with him when he says this. Traditional assessment also seems to be very contrived, meaning it's the opposite of real life. It's very artificial. And he goes on to state that more commonly in life, as in authentic assessments, we're asked to demonstrate proficiency by doing something. So already you can see where we're going with task assessment and authentic assessment, that you're always going to be getting your students to actually do something outside of ticking ticking a box and getting a right or wrong answer. Traditional assessment tends to focus on recall or recognition. Again, I will point to Bloom's taxonomy's remember and understand, because that's pretty much synonyms for these words. And then authentic assessment is more about construction and application. And again, you can see these two words. Our application aligns directly with apply in Bloom's taxonomy, and construction obviously aligns with create in Bloom's taxonomy. So again, we're looking at a big difference between traditional assessment, that's lower order thinking, and authentic assessment, that's higher order thinking. So he says traditional assessments, if well constructed, can determine whether learners have acquired knowledge, skill, or competence. I rewarded that for those three. They feel authentic enough, but they can't reveal what we really know, what we can do, and how well we can do it. And again, what we know is knowledge, what we can do is skill, and how well we can do it is competence. However, authentic assessments ask learners to apply, analyze, and evaluate what they've learned in a substantial manner. The bonus is that learners create new meaning in the process as well. So again, when I was reading Muller for today, I decided to do the rewriting so that these verbs, he had them in different orders and kind of different ways, but for me, I just read it and said he's talking completely about, again, Bloom's taxonomy, that the higher order thinking skills are what's going to happen when you do authentic assessment. And then this one to me was one of the most interesting. Traditional assessment tends to be teacher structured, and authentic assessment tends to be learner structured. I think this is probably going to be the most challenging because, again, in our talks earlier today, of course, we have to deal with the parents, number one, but number two, we also have to deal with students who are obsessed with grades and not with learning, and who prefer to depend on the teacher structuring all of the learning, because they've learned to depend on that. And so we have to push back, and we have to push back on the learners and get the learners to do the work. So I'm not doing that right now because I'm busy lecturing, because right now I'm being very teacher structured, right? I'm being kind of the opposite of what I'm talking about, but I'm making some points, and I'm not going to talk for that long, and we're going to get back to some interactions in just a second, but this is just all these 5 areas that Muller's talking about that I want to get through as quickly as possible. So he writes, in a test, it's the test makers, not the learners, who structure what a learner can and will demonstrate. Learners' attention focuses on the test and on the grade and on pleasing their parents with a good grade, and the parents want you to make sure that they get a good grade. So learning gets lost and forgotten way back there in the back of the room, or sometimes outside. It's never the center of the class, no matter how much as teachers we try to make it that way. And I'm not saying give up. Of course, we have to make sure that learning is the center of any kind of lesson that we do. So authentic assessments give control to learners to determine what can be evidenced as proficiency. And I highlighted this word, I highlighted the phrase control to learners. Janine will remember back in another era, Caleb Gattegno talking about giving control to the learners, right? So this comes up all the time, and it's very true in authentic assessment too. And this will be very uncomfortable for teachers who are used to the old paradigms of teaching, where the teacher is at the center and the teacher structures at least the assessment. But again, our job is to structure it so that the learners take control of their learning. We're not supposed to structure their learning. We're supposed to structure their control of the learning, which I think is a very different thing. And we can do this throughout authentic assessment too. And his last point here is that even when learners are unable to select topics or formats, there are multiple acceptable ways to demonstrate knowledge, skill, or competence through creation of a unique product or performance. So one thing that teachers need to carefully craft, again, is that environment that will spur intrinsic motivation to learn from our students, and to focus less on the grade and to focus more on the learning, if it's possible. And I think it is. And the last point that he makes here is the difference between the type of evidence of learning you can get. In traditional assessment, you tend to get indirect evidence, and in authentic assessment, you tend to be able to get more direct and richer evidence of learning. So he writes here, even if an MCQ asks the learner to apply, analyze, or evaluate facts to a new situation, and the learner gets that, multiple choice question. So even if a multiple choice question asks the learner to apply, analyze, or evaluate facts to a new situation, and the learner gets it right, what do you know? What do you now know about that learner? I literally can talk about a half an hour for this, because I have worked with faculty at my college, and faculty says, look, we need multiple choice questions because we don't have time to grade open-ended type questions. So we need multiple choice questions that can measure higher order thinking skills. Can it be done? And my answer is, yes, it can, but that's the worst possible way you can measure higher order thinking skills. So you can do it. It's going to take a lot of work, because you have to write, if you know how to write a test item in an exam and you want it to be higher order, you probably have to write something like a scenario type of question. And so now you have to be really careful about how you write that scenario. And then you have to take a lot of pain and labor to create 3 or 4 options for which the test taker chooses. And one of those 3 or 4 is the correct answer. But writing those options takes a lot of time, and it's a really difficult thing to do. It's not impossible, but it does take time, and maybe it will do that. But then in the end, how do you know that they're not just good guessers of questions? Because if you know standardized tests, there's a huge industry that trains people on how to take these standardized tests. So if you don't know the answer to the question, here's what you need to do. So again, it's all about, even if you make tests that have really good, really robust, higher order thinking skills type of question that you're designing, you could still have a person who's been trained to guess in the right way to guess the question. So you can't really know, you can't really get that direct evidence that they're using their higher order thinking skills and that they've learned something new and that they're demonstrating this knowledge in some way. So for efficiency's sake, you can do it, but it's just, the bottom line is it's just not acceptable, if that makes sense. So anyway, like I say, I've had the last 3 to 5 years, I've had lots of debates with teachers at my college about higher order thinking skills and multiple choice questions. And it can be done, but it's the worst possible way to do things, especially because you can't count on that as being true evidence that learning has happened. Right? So we can make some inferences, however, it's indirect evidence, and it's difficult to see their ability to solve problems in the real world. So yeah, sure, go ahead and write those multiple choice questions. Take your time, labor over it, but in the end, know that it's indirect evidence at best. So there are better ways that need to be done with assessment. So as an example again, authentic assessment offers a direct evidence of application and construction of knowledge, skill, or competence. So as an example, you have somebody learning how to play basketball. You can do one of 2 things. You can put them on the basketball court because that will give you direct evidence of their proficiency, or you can give them a written test about basketball, and that's going to give you much less direct evidence, much more indirect evidence of application and construction of knowledge, skill, and competence in basketball. That's why I have a green basketball and not a red basketball. Okay, so here's a quick question. How can a learner effectively, this is a, how do I say this? Anyway, how can a learner effectively critique an argument? Which of these two things provides direct, authentic evidence that the learner can critique? Number one, you have them write a critique. Or number two, you have the learner answer 10 multiple choice questions about how to critique. So again, how can a learner effectively critique an argument? Well, which one of these things provides direct, authentic evidence that the learner can critique? And for this video recording, I always choose A. It is not necessarily the correct answer. And I'm just going to click submit to show you how to do that. I'm just waiting for one more person to answer. I'm just going to give about 5 more seconds. Okay. So most of you got this. Remember that the best way they can critique is by writing about critiques. You could have 10 higher order thinking skills, multiple choice questions, but you're still not going to get that direct, authentic evidence that you need in a task assessment in order to know that they've learned what they're supposed to learn and that they can produce what they're supposed to produce as a higher order thinking skill. Also, I just want to note, this is the polling feature of Nearpod. And now I'm going to stop talking about task assessment for a second. This is the polling feature of Nearpod. And this is an instructional design thing that when I first saw the poll, I never thought of using, which is pose a question and see how people answer the question. The good thing about this is the person who got the wrong answer, we don't know who that is. I know who it is as the teacher, but the other students don't know. So this, using a poll to check comprehension is, you could use a test, but the poll kind of shows everybody in the class how the class is doing. And you might even challenge your students to say, okay, I want 90% of you to get this right. Otherwise, we're going to go back or something. I don't know. But it's a good way to, you might even say, okay, I'm going to ask you this question. You put it up on the board, and maybe you put them into small groups and say, decide on the answer, find out which answer is going to be the best answer. And then before you answer the poll individually, make sure you decide and you get through things and you put them in groups for a few minutes so that they're working on things. And then after that, you say, okay, now answer the poll question. And you might challenge them that you want 90% of the class to get the right answer. And then hopefully that's what happens. So sometimes I use polls just to say, as you've seen before, how are you doing so far? What do you think about this? I like this, I don't like it, whatever. But here I'm using the polling in a very different way, which is to pose a question and give one of 2 or 3 different answers to see how people are doing with understanding the concept as a whole. So it's a little different from using a quiz in this sense. Okay, if you give me just a second, we have someone who just joined about 2 minutes ago. So, Mr. Islam, I see you're there. Thanks for joining. And excuse me, in the chat, I've just pasted a link. And this is a link to the presentation slides I have. These are highly interactive slides. What you're seeing on your screen, I'm sharing a participant version, but when you click on that, you're going to be asked for your name. So just type in your name and click the big blue, I think it's join, the big blue join button in the lower right corner. that will bring you into the slides. And then you don't need to look at my participant screen. You need to look at your browser window that opened, and because that's where you'll be able to do the interactions. Okay, and I hope you could hear me, and if you can, just type yes in the chat so I know that you're okay with that. If you know how to open the chat, hopefully you open the chat. Anyway, I'll just move on and assume that you're good to go. Okay, so here's my next question. Which of these concepts is least clear to you? And I do want you to think about them all because I'm going to let you answer on the next screen. So I need to just I'm giving you about a minute here to think about it. So remember, selecting a response in a traditional test versus having them perform a task, the contrived nature of traditional assessment versus the real life nature of authentic assessment, the reliance on recall and recognition in traditional assessment versus the advocacy of construction and application of authentic assessment, the teacher-structured nature of traditional assessment versus the learner-structured nature. That still comes from the teacher, but it's slightly different in authentic assessment. And then the difference between knowing actually what people learned through the indirect evidence of a correct question, or the things you get if you do authentic assessment and you get a little bit more direct evidence of what people have learned. So what I'd like you to do coming up here is our famous collaboration board. And I would like you to pick one of the concepts that is least clear to you. So once again, I'm getting a little bit of a lag on my slide. Sorry about that. So I'm just going to upload that slide here. If you give me just a second, I need to dig it out. I got 7 different windows on a tiny laptop. Oh, oops. Okay, it's there. Here we go. All right, there it is. Okay, and we can just pop that in there, post it. All right, so now you should be able to have a look at the 5 as I posted here. And again, I do want you to think of one where you really feel like you need a little bit more information, and then just type it in here and explain why it's not as clear as it needs to be for you. And Mr. Islam, if you can hear me and you know how to access the chat, can you just type hello so I know that you can hear me? Because it's no good if I'm just talking without you understanding what's going on. All right, I'm going to assume you're having some connection problems. And maybe Elaf is too. All right. I think maybe your mic is open now. I just saw, Mr. Islam. Can you talk again?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Okay, yes, I hear you now. Great.
Yes.
Again, if you look in the chat, let me just paste that again for you. Probably on your control bar in Zoom, maybe you see something flashing. If you can open that up, that's the chat, and I pasted in a link to these, to what's called Nearpod, which is kind of an interactive online tool. So as you can see, we're doing some interactive stuff right now. People are doing some thinking and writing in some of these concepts I was talking about as you joined us. So of course you missed the beginning part of it, and that's fine. But hopefully on your screen now you can see that people have typed a few things up there. And
Yes, I see.
Everyone who's here, and I think Elaf is probably having connection problems. Okay, so you've all put some things, so let me, oh no, Elaf is there, she's writing, okay. So we have probably not sure which is authentic learning and differences in types. We need examples. Okay, I tried to give a couple of examples. I think the best example I can give is when we think about when we think about traditional assessment, it's usually tests. It's usually multiple choice questions, fill in the blank questions. Actually, I have some other examples coming up, I think. I'd have to think about that in the slides. I think I do have examples coming up. But it tends to be test-based things, and then we want to move away from that and into getting them to do tasks that make them produce things that are more authentic and real world. So I do have some examples coming up for that, but I just wanted to get down kind of Dr. Muller's theories about these differences between traditional and authentic assessment first. Contrived versus real life. It's not always easy to find real life tasks. Where can I find ideas? My answer for that is the internet, but that's always my answer for everything, isn't it? There's a lot going on in the world. There's a lot of websites where people are taking actions of various kinds, whether it's raising charity or doing relief work, or groups that have mutual interests in books or literature or art or even teaching. There are things out there, and there are probably, especially if you're teaching middle school students or high school students, there are probably groups out there of like-minded educators that are even looking for, what do I call it? Students to work together with each other at different schools in different countries on the same project. So they're out there. You just have to kind of dig and find them. And again, I would say that's the place I would start is look up the concept of personal learning network, PLNs, because there are a lot of personal learning networks out there of people who have very similar interests. I would even say websites like Pinterest. Pinterest tends to be used for people who are interested in crafts, craft making, or pottery, or sculpture, or jewelry making. But also on Pinterest, there are plenty of educators who share lots of their ideas and projects, and who are looking for collaborating on projects with other teachers. And these all can be real life based projects. So I think that's interesting. Next one writes, I'm most interested in spending time on learner structured assessment and different ways to do that online. Again, one suggestion I always make is if you're doing formative assessments, that is quizzes, it's not a bad thing to do quizzes, and probably one of the best ways that you can make it more authentic is you do a review every once in a while. You do a review quiz, but you ask your students to get into maybe pairs. Again, it depends. Maybe you want to give a 10-question quiz. So you put them in 10 groups, and each group makes one of the 10 questions, of course, under your supervision. And you want them to work under the honors. Well, it's a formative assessment anyway, so it's probably not worth any part of the grade, which they probably won't like, I don't know. Or If it is worth part of the grade, then you work on the honor system where my group created one question, but I have to get at least the other 9 questions right. So you have 10 questions produced by your students, but they don't share their questions or the answers with each other, and then they take the quiz. You could probably just do that in one class immediately. And they spend the class writing a review question, and then you assemble the quiz, and they do that quiz right then and there within that class. That's a great way of fostering some learner structured assessment right there. Formative assessment right in the class. It gives you, there you're asking them to produce something. And then they're happy because they've taken the test and gotten the score. You're happy because they created the questions, and you can, that tells you what they've learned through the questions they've created. So it's win-win for everybody. That might be a good approach. I think the first time you try that, it might be a miserable failure. And I think the second time you try that, it might be a miserable failure. And the third and the fourth time. But maybe after 5 times, once they understand what's going on and they've had enough practice, this becomes a regular thing and a really good way to review work and get them to produce what they've learned. And then they take the quiz that their peers have made. Indirect evidence, last one, indirect evidence. I don't understand this concept as in traditional assessment, we always apply direct instructions. So what is meant by indirect evidence? My answer to that again is, if you've made, let's say you have taken the time and you've made a nice multiple choice question. The question starts out as a scenario of some kind. I'm trying to recall one that I did. You consider it like a mini case study. And the mini case study, you've designed it so it really only has one correct answer. But then it's a mini case study, it's a mini case study, but you're not asking them to produce the answers. You are writing maybe 4 answers for them to choose. And if it's a case study, then you're going to spend a lot of time carefully writing the question stem. We call it question stems. And then the options, which are the answers, we call them options. You're going to spend time writing each of those options. And you're going to spend a lot of time making sure that only one of those 4 options is absolutely the correct answer. But each of the 4 are going to be very close to each other, and it's going to take some higher order thinking to come up with which one to choose correctly. The problem is, even if a student gets the correct answer, you don't really know if they guessed or they didn't unless you ask them. Did you guess at this answer? How do you know this was the right answer? If they get the right answer and you ask them, how do you know this is the right answer? Now you're asking for more direct evidence. If they just choose the answer and it's right, you still don't have direct evidence that they've learned something. Because you don't really know. You don't know if they guessed or not. You haven't learned anything new from them, only that they chose the right answer. So the other way you can solve that problem of indirect evidence is if you give them a multiple choice question, and then the next question on the test says something like, how do you know your previous answer is the correct answer? But then you're asking them to either write that answer, or you can write another set of four answers in multiple choice that kind of are a check on that. So there is a way to get direct evidence through multiple choice questions, but it's really, really difficult, and I don't think it's worth the energy, and it's much better just to go the authentic assessment route and just let them do some kind of real world thing as their task, as their assessment task. Okay, I hope that answers that question. So I'm going to very carefully move on because I want to make sure we get through things. Okay, so There are four main types of tasks. If we talk about task assessment, there's four types of tasks. The first one is selected response. Again, learners select an answer from among those given, or from memory or from allowable study aids, and no new knowledge is constructed. Students remember and understand information required to select the appropriate response. I forgot to emphasize the words remember and understand. And again, remember and understand are the two lowest order thinking skills levels in Bloom's taxonomy, which is why you see the little graphic there at the bottom lots. And selected response questions means multiple choice tests, true false questions, matching questions, fill in the blank questions, any kind of labeling questions. Okay, all of these are what we classify as selected response questions. And again, this is a task assessment type item. Okay, so there's actually labels for all these things. The next one is called constructed response. The next task is constructed response. These are things like short answer essays, or if you ask people to show their work, show your work. Mind maps can be constructed response. If you ask them to write a topic sentence based on a passage that they're reading, or if you ask them to identify a theme and write down the theme. Here, they're not making any choices, they're writing things down. But still, what they're doing is responding to a narrowly conceived prompt, and learners construct answers, usually from prior knowledge, that uniquely differ from others, the knowledge that they produce. So this means that at least some learner thinking is revealed. So if you compare selected response with constructed response, at least in constructed response, you're getting a little bit more direct evidence that learning has occurred, and the learning that you want to have occurred has occurred. Okay, so we have two more of these. The next kind of task is asking them to produce a product. So products include things like making metaphors, writing school rules, doing research reports after researching, teaching them some reading strategies and having them convey them back to you, which ones they're using. Any kind of project work that you do with them is definitely product oriented. Literary analysis or character analysis, if you're teaching literature, these are usually product oriented tasks that you're asking them to do. So again, learners construct a broadly conceived, new, and unique product that reveals their understanding of certain concepts while evidencing their ability to use higher order thinking skills. However, product assessments typically reflect deeper learning and allow more time between the presentation of the prompt and the learner response than constructed response items. So if you're asking them to do a product, you're going to give them much more time than either a selected response or a constructed response. So if you have a test period and they have a limited amount of time, asking them to do some this type of task assessment is going to take a little bit more time, but it produces more direct evidence of learning, so it's definitely more desirable because it definitely falls on the higher order thinking skills continuum in Bloom's taxonomy. And the last thing is performance. You can ask them to do a performance. These include things like auditions or rehearsals, any kind of dramatic readings, any kind of skits or role plays that you do in class, making speeches or giving any type of presentation, whether it's an individual presentation or a group presentation. These are all performance type tasks. And again, here learners construct a broadly, this is pretty much the same as product. Learners construct a broadly conceived new and unique performance, not product, but performance, that reveals their understanding of certain concepts while, again, evidencing their ability to use higher order thinking skills. So performance assessment, exactly like product assessment, reflects deeper learning and more time needs to be allowed between the presentation of the prompt and the performance response, more than constructed response items. So performance and product are similar in that they need more time, but they also produce something that's unique and definitely employs higher order thinking skills in the making of that product or performance. Okay,
Sorry, Larry.
yes.
I am being in middle school teaching, I am much into getting the kids to learn how to take notes. Where do you think that falls as an assessment?
I would say that's a product more than anything, because there, again, if I go back, for me, that's any kind of research report or reading strategies, or even reading strategies, you could call it listening strategies. If you want to call it 4 skills strategies because of language teaching, I think that probably works there, because they're taking notes, they're listening, they're processing, then they're producing some kind of a product. In this case, it's notes. And you could, you could use that as an assessment, right? You could say,
Oh, I do.
I'm going to give you a 10-minute lecture now, keep notes, then I'm going to collect your notes and grade your notes. Why
Yeah,
not?
no, I do. Online teaching now has become, I mean, I'm not saying 30%, 40% is now assessing their notes.
Yeah, okay. That's, that's interesting to hear. I'd probably want to see more how you do that too. But I think that, there's nothing wrong with doing that, because that's definitely an authentic assessment, isn't it? I mean, it's controlled to some extent, but still they have to be able to process what they're hearing and to pop it into their notes. And if they know they're getting graded on the notes, and I would say that this is one of those things where you have to, when you introduce it at first, you need to be as, what's the best word? You need to give them a little bit of leeway in the first 2 or 3 times that they're making notes, so they can talk about it and understand how they need to create what they need to create in terms of the notes. And then the real grading comes if you're doing it 2 or 3 times a week. I would say the first 2 weeks is just to get the practice in, to understand what it takes to make good notes. Then you start to say, okay, from this point on, your notes, I'm collecting and grading them, and I'm looking for this, 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 and that. That's where performance rubrics might come in, and we'll talk about that very shortly.
If I can add, Kirsten, I would add a step, you might consider adding the step of having them do peer review. Like having them, okay, so once you've established what are the characteristics of good notes, of good note taking, of well taken notes, then have them do some note taking and swap. This is really hard online though. That's what I do in the classroom, but I'm not really sure how easy it would be to swap notes online before turning it into you. Because then, since they have to evaluate their partner's notes, they're also evaluating how well their partner has met the criteria, which also shows.
Can they use Google Drive to sort of share the same text?
Okay, that's a great idea. Yeah. Thank you.
Google's really good for any kind of collaborative projects that you do with students. And sure, I would use a page in Google. What is it called? Why can't I remember? Google Docs, right? I would have them set up pair work Google Docs, where one person is the writer and the other is the critique person, entering in comments, and have them practice with that. But I would also probably base that on a rubric. And again, I'll talk about rubrics very shortly, but that's how I would probably do it if you're doing any kind of self-assessment or peer assessment. You need to scaffold them on doing those types of assessments, whether it's self or peer. And sorry, I'm muting people because we have some background noise. Okay, so 5:46. Oh, okay. We've gone about an hour and 15 minutes. Not bad. I think we'll be able to finish. Oh, we were supposed to finish in 15 minutes. Yeah, we're definitely going to run over again, but that's okay. All right, so I want to know how you're doing so far. So if you feel like I don't understand at all, 1 finger, 2 fingers, I need help, 3, I'm getting there, 4, mostly understand, 5, I completely understand, I own this, I'm ready to teach this, let me take over from you, Larry, and I'll run the session. Welcome to Pick 5. Oh, okay, Janine, it's all yours. Okay, now I get to switch my background because we're coming into rubric assessment. Okay, Islam, you came in a little late. So again, on the screen, I'm just gonna do, I always pick A, I don't understand, and I'm gonna click this big submit button in the lower right corner. I know you came a little late, so you don't, oh, but you did get into Nearpod, so that's good. Excuse me. All right, so we're doing good. Most of you are telling me that you're fine, that you are 4 or 5 fingers, mostly understanding. That means we can move on. And the one person who said I don't understand is me, because I chose A. Thank you, Nelson Mandela. Education is the most powerful weapon you can use to change the world. I agree 100%. He's one of my heroes. Let's move on. Let's talk about rubrics now. And again, I anticipate that will be done by my time, 6:30, look, about 45 more minutes, but probably much less. But I want to give it a long time. But if you need to leave for any reason, of course, I won't stop you. And the recording will be uploaded very quickly. The earlier session I did today is already up on YouTube, ready for your review if you ever want to review it. So let's talk about rubrics. Rubrics are the basic definition from, again, Dr. Muller and his page on the Authentic Assessment Toolbox. He says it's a scoring scale used to assess learner production or performance along a task-specific set of criteria. So you might think of all those individual tasks put together into one big page as a rubric. And when you're using rubrics, there tend to be 2 main questions about how to use rubrics. So the first question is, how well are my learners doing with this thing and this thing and this thing, X, Y, and Z, or X, Y, and Z. I'm not sure if you use Z or Z. Now I'm used to use, I'm American and we learned Z, but everyone else uses Z, so now I'm using Z. So how well are my learners doing with this X thing and this Y thing and this Z thing? Or you can ask, how well are my students, my learners doing overall? So there's 2 ways to use rubrics. Either you're looking point by point, or you're looking at the whole thing. And that's why we call these analytic rubrics, and we call them holistic rubrics. So we're going to look at these 2 types of rubrics. There was another page I was going to show you. I decided not to. There's a 3rd type of rubric that I saw called a 1-point rubric, but I'm just going to leave that one alone. Because the 2 main types that Muller describes on his page, and he's got a lot of examples, and I'm not showing you any of his examples, but he has really good, really detailed examples. And again, that's on the page that I showed you at the very beginning. So I strongly recommend you go and check that out, because he does some really good stuff here. So what you're getting from me is the basics of authentic assessment, right? I'm not going too deeply. So analytic rubrics articulate levels of performance for each criterion separately. And so if you're asking students to write an argumentative essay, for example, and you give them an argumentative essay rubric, then the evaluators are going to assess 2 things: whether the learner has done a poor job, a good job, or an excellent job of organization, and to distinguish that from how well the learner did on coherent argument. So you have your 2 criteria, and you have your 3 levels of performance. Your criteria being organization, coherent argument, and your level of performance being poor, good, or excellent. And I'm going to talk about these. Again, levels of performance. Using levels of performance in rubrics, whether they are analytic or holistic, they provide clearer expectations of what they're supposed to do in their performance. This also can apply to the products. Okay, if you think about the task-specific assessments they need to do. And again, the most higher order thinking ones are product and performance tasks. So if you're assessing product or levels of product or levels of performance, you're outlining clear expectations from your learners, and it helps you when you're marking to be more consistent in the marking and more objective in the marking. So more consistent or objective assessment. And it helps you to give better feedback. And what I would recommend is that even if you do use rubrics, that you make a space where you can provide detailed and specific feedback to each student. So you're not just marking them on the rubric, but you're giving them even more details on how things work. And the reason why you should do this is mainly because I'm thinking about a good friend and colleague of mine who used to teach university level, obviously university level law students. She used to teach first year writing, law, how do you say it? Law student writing. And she hates rubrics because they're very limiting. She prefers the direct feedback that she can give to individual students. Now, I'm not going to argue with her, and I'm not going to present you her case, although she is a lawyer, so she has a pretty good case against rubrics. And if you want to read it, you can bug me and I'll find it and I'll send it to you. But because rubrics kind of, even though they do set clear expectations and make things more objective and more consistent, the feedback can and should be the most important part of the rubric, because then that moves beyond the set criteria you have in the rubric. So as long as you include feedback inside of rubrics, you're going to be okay. So all rubrics and the descriptors in analytic rubrics, they have descriptors. And descriptors, and again, I'm reading on the screen, descriptors tell learners more precisely what performance looks like at each level and how their work may be distinguished from the works of others for each criterion. And yes, an example is coming up in just a second. So the descriptors also help the evaluator, that's you and me, who have made the rubrics, help them more precisely and consistently distinguish between the learner's work. Rubrics are supposed to help you to give better marks to the students who know what they're doing because they've met the descriptors, as opposed to those students who have ignored your descriptors and just given you whatever work that they thought was appropriate. Whereas you've tried to guide them on what you're looking for what constitutes excellent work or mediocre work, and you've spelled this out to them before they've started creating what they need to create for you. So this is a typical example of a really basic rubric. So this we can call the online instructional performance rubric. So you can use this rubric with me if you want. And I just made up a few descriptors, and remember, at the beginning, I asked you to self-assess yourself whether you feel like you're a novice, an apprentice, a practitioner, or an expert. So because of space, I put apprentice and practitioner together. So I can call this the range of performance between novice and expert. Okay, so that's the range that we're evaluating. And then we have 4 criteria that we are grading, and we have the descriptors of what that criteria looks like under each of the 3 levels in the range. So if I was observing you as your online instructional performance and you're working with a class of students, I would look at the types of questions you ask. And if I see you asking only yes/no questions, or things like, do you understand? Are you good? Can we move on? Are you ready to go? If I hear lots of those types of questions, I would probably rate you as a novice in questioning. But if you move and you ask lots of open-ended questions, which I think I do most of the time, then I could call you an expert on the scale of questioning. I'd call you a questioning expert according to this rubric. Now, talk time, I'm really bad today. I'm definitely at the apprentice practitioner level for this one because I'm talking too much. Whereas an expert talks, anyway, these are criteria that I have devised off the top of my head for today's demonstration. And so whenever you create a rubric, you can decide on how descriptive you want to get, and you can decide on your levels, and you can decide on what criteria you want to look for. What I would do if you're using rubrics with students, in this case too, to make them even more authentic, is ask them to, well, first of all, you need to use rubrics with them so they understand what they are and how they work. And then eventually get to the place where you're asking them to construct rubrics for themselves. But of course, you're going to co-construct these rubrics with them. You're not just going to let them do whatever they want. You need to get them to be serious about the various things they want to assess themselves with. But once they understand that there's a range of performance and then different criteria, you might have different students who want to assess themselves with different criteria, and you might set the range. You might be the one to set the range, but they get to choose their criteria, and then they get to write in their descriptors. But again, these are discrete. You're separating things out, which is why this is called an analytic rubric, and they're looking point by point by point. And the descriptors could be 1 or 2, or it could be 20 descriptors. The more descriptors there are, the more you have to write in sentences for what is acceptable to get the mark of that particular performance. But this is what rubrics look like typically. Holistic rubrics, on the other hand, do not list each separate level of performance for each criterion. They assign a level of performance by assessing across multiple criteria as a whole. So you don't have these discrete parts, you just have one whole phrase. I meant to give you an example, but actually the examples are here. So we're going to look at 3 examples now, and I want you to tell me if you think that these are, you are better, sorry. I want you to look at these and tell me, do you think this is better suited as an analytic rubric or as a holistic rubric? Okay. Remember, the difference between the two is analytic separates out different criteria and has different descriptors, but they both have a range of assessment. And if we think from novice to expert, that's a typical way of labeling a range, but it could be, you know, beginner, advanced. There's a lot of different ranges you can use. I'm giving you 45 seconds to look and give your answer if you think it's an analytic or a holistic rubric. So you have only a short amount of time for this. Okay, are you ready? Here we go. Here's the first one. So in the top right corner, I think it's the top right corner. It's not changing for me. Okay. In the top right corner, you need to click on that little graphic and it's going to expand out. So this first one you can see is what we did at the beginning. Assess yourself as a teacher. I'm a novice, I'm just starting to learn, I'm an apprentice, I'm a practitioner. So is this an analytic rubric or is this a holistic rubric? So again, I'm going to choose A because I always choose A on my screen and it's not necessarily the correct answer. And you have 10 seconds left. Okay, so only one of us got this wrong, which was me. So all of you can see that's a simple example of a holistic rubric, right? Because all the phrases are there in one part, but then the performance level is kind of the definition of all the holistic parts, right? Okay. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, so before I start this one, this is 45 seconds. This is an activity called the 1-minute essay. And the 1-minute essay is exactly as it sounds. It's something you can use with students at the beginning, middle, or end of any class. And you can give them anything to write about, but they have only 1 minute to write about it. So is it better to, which is better to use an analytic rubric with the 1-minute essay or the holistic rubric with a 1-minute essay? Okay, so we're going to start right now. You got 45 seconds. Which do you think is better to you? Is this better for an analytic rubric or a holistic rubric? And again, I'm going to choose A. Again, I'm just choosing A to choose A. Okay. So 4 of you chose B and 1 of you chose A. So I want to ask you, why did you choose A or why did you choose B? Because there is no right answer for this one. I want to hear why you chose A and why you chose B. I tricked you.
Well, I chose A, so I'm the minority because I was thinking that even in 1 minute, you can always check for vocabulary. You can check for grammar if it's an English thing. You can check for having understood the question itself or the knowledge that comes behind the question. So you can break it down into smaller pieces, even though it's only 1 minute long.
Okay, B people? Just one person.
But I think considering the fact that it's a very short thing, I think that a general message could be okay. Otherwise, it would be also very time consuming.
Okay, so of course it's good you both gave the answer that I was hoping you would give, and I would propose that 1-minute essays can be either. If you decide to use an analytic rubric, I would probably introduce the rubric before the essay, and the rubric would probably be used the same anytime a 1-minute essay was done. So again, if you do 1-minute essay with students and you say we're going to use this analytic rubric and it is going to be graded, at least give them 2 to 3 attempts to deal with thinking about all the different criteria and how to meet those criteria in that 1 minute of time. Because I do agree with the holistic people that 1 minute's very short, and if you just try to throw them in without any preparation, you're going to have some big problems. And I agree, Kirsten, with you on the analytics side in that, yes, they can do it in a minute with practice and understanding the rubric before they start and giving them 2 to 3 attempts at trying to meet the criterion and seeing how you're scoring them in a formative sense before it becomes a more summative grading of the rubric. I hope that makes sense. Okay. I like both answers. They were good. Okay. This next one, again, is an activity called poster session. And if you are not familiar with the poster session, you're having students make products of some kind. I'll give you the example I did. Many years ago, probably about 350 years ago now, when I was teaching in Japan, I asked students to do a video project, and I asked them to make a little 1-page poster to present their idea of the video to their classmates. We posted them up along the walls, and they walked around and asked questions of each other and answered questions. And it was a really interesting conversation about the projects they were going to work on. And then after that, they produced some really pretty cool videos that I really loved. It was one of my favorite projects to do of all time. So, the poster session. So that's how a poster session works. Is it best to use with an analytic rubric or a holistic rubric? And again, that's your choice here. You got 45 seconds to take a vote. And you might want to expand that out so you can look at it. Our little poster session friend is talking about Bloom's taxonomy today. But if you're presenting your poster, what's the best way to mark this type of assessment on a rubric? Using analytic or holistic? Oh, I better answer. Of course, I'm going to choose A. All right, we get the perfect crowd. There's 5 of you, and 2 of you said A, and 3 of you said B. I also chose A, which is why we have a 50-50 split. But my A, I always choose A. Okay, so the B's first. Why do you think this is best done as holistic?
I think because there are several elements that go into making an effective poster. And I think that the students would agree. But in both of the last two, I've wanted to say it depends, because I think that this is just like the previous one in that it absolutely depends on the instructions you give them before they start, on the agreement you make with the students about what they're going to, what would constitute an effective or a good poster. But this one, I felt more strongly that it was analytic than I did the other one was holistic. But that's my feeling.
Oh, okay. I was starting with the B's and you chose A, but that's okay. All right.
Oh,
So we heard from the A's. We heard from the A's talking about why analytic rubrics might be more appropriate here. How about the holistic people? I don't call people by names. Just jump in.
Okay, I just didn't want to speak again if there was someone else. Anyway.
You also
well,
chose analytic though.
I quite agree with Janine with the idea that it depends, but
Okay.
I thought that in this case I chose a different option compared to the other one because the students have more time to work on this project. And I guess I would probably sort of go through what my expectations are about the creation of a poster. And so they should probably work with some guidelines of what they are expected to do. And so in a way, I would probably try to evaluate assess the work through those guidelines. Okay, whereas in 1 minute, I guess that, for example, I wouldn't take into consideration grammar because even I made mistakes today when writing. Because in 1 minute, and it doesn't mean that I don't know maybe the spelling of words. It's simply a question of time. So here, the time is not so tight, and so I would probably spend more time on this.
Okay.
Okay, I wrote holistic this time instead, for the simple reason that for me, posters are creativity, and the idea of giving them guidelines which guides them too much, I think limits their creativity. And the most important thing is for me when I see posters is how engaged I am with what they have created. So I like the idea of absolutely not giving them guidelines. And usually when I don't give guidelines, wow, I mean, their minds explode. And so I would never think of doing a poster with analytics.
It sounds like to me that it's worth experimenting with both of these type of rubrics on different projects and products with students. Eventually that, at the end of a term or the end of a school year, you're having them decide, if you want to make it even more authentic, let them decide which type of rubric they want, and then of course what the criteria is going to look like depending on the rubric they select. And you might have it that if you do a poster session at the end of the year and every individual student is making up their own rubric, whether it's holistic or analytic, and you're working with them on creating what's going to be assessed. Because that now you're getting into even more authentic things. Because remember, our main job is our main job as the creators of tasks is to make sure that we are creating the conditions for learning to happen. So as much as we can push off on the students, and again, with practice and iteration, eventually at the end of the year, they should be doing all that stuff by themselves with a little bit of your guidance, but as little as possible is best, because then they have the control and the power which they're supposed to have. And it does take some practice to get there, of course. And then again, if things are being graded, then it's win-win for everybody, because you have your direct evidence of learning and they have their grade, which is all they care about. But you got them to get to that grade through getting their direct evidence of learning, because they should be able to decide what a nice poster is supposed to look like by the end of the year if you've done a poster session type activity 3, 4, or 5 times during the year, right? Hopefully. Okay. I'm looking at the time and we're running over. Here's another good quote. It's not knowledge that should come to you, but you who should come to the knowledge. So this is a very wise old imam saying this a very long time ago. Okay, and this gives us a transition into, and I have to change behind me, right? My virtual background isn't working. There we go, portfolio assessment. I had to do that today, I'm sorry. Okay, this is going to be short, portfolio, because again, skimming the surface, and Dr. Mueller on his site really takes a deep dive into it and gives a lot of great examples. Same thing with rubrics. We just covered kind of the surface, and he really goes into it. He has a lot of good examples. So anyway, that's the reason why this is called Basics of, just to give you a taste and to point you especially to that website, because I think he does a really good treatment on authentic assessment overall. So I'm just being his translator today. So he mentions these, I think it was 7 different criteria for portfolios, and I know there's a lot of words here. So these are the questions you have to answer before you decide the type of portfolio you're going to use with your students. And again, I'm going to show you 3 types of portfolios, and you can use them all because they all have slightly different purposes. So what's the purpose of the portfolio is very important. What audience is going to look at it when it gets created, and what samples of student work needs to go into it. And then the process, what's going to be the process during its development? In other words, how are you going to select what gets included? Are you going to ask them to reflect on what they made, and are those reflections going in there? And you need to, if you're having a conference with them about the portfolio, are you going to record that? Are they going to reflect on the conference? So there's a lot of different things you need to think about during the process. And then the management, time and materials, how are they going to be managed in its development? How and when is it going to be shared with the audience? If the audience is parents directly, or if it's a general thing, this also needs to be decided. And then how is it going to be evaluated? And if it is used for evaluation, and we'll talk about evaluation portfolios, when and how should it be evaluated? So there are a lot of considerations that need to go into the planning of using portfolio and portfolio assessment, but I'm definitely an advocate of it. And in terms of the Tools, again, I think Google is probably one of the best because it's a collaborative platform. You can create folders for every student, and then they can pop in all their representative work in a digital form. Even if they do something at home that's physical, they can at least take a photo of it and share that photo as part of the portfolio. Obviously, you can't have the physical object these days. So I think Google is probably a good medium for assembling portfolios. So there are 3 different portfolio types that I'm going to talk about very briefly. And really, we're almost done. Again, this is going to be a really short section. So you have a growth portfolio, you have a showcase portfolio, and you have an evaluation portfolio. And sometimes these could go together in some ways, but but Dr. Mueller on the website splits these 3 apart. And so here is my compacted version of what he said. He's got 4 points about growth. A growth portfolio will show the growth or change over time. So again, as I've mentioned a few times, even let's say you're doing a poster session with students in the beginning and you give them a rubric to grade that, and then you do that 3 or 4 times so that by the end, they're making their own rubrics, and the work that they're doing, if you can document each of those 4 or 5 times, that those could all go into the growth portfolio. And this helps to develop process skills, which students need. They need to think about project work and breaking things down into phases and working on phases here and there and getting things done. So if they're evaluating themselves, or if they're evaluating their peers, or they're setting individual goals, or they're setting group goals, all those things could go into a growth portfolio. Growth portfolio also helps them to identify their own strengths and weaknesses, whether it's working individually again or in groups. And most of that identification usually happens through some kind of self-reflection. And if you're not, you need to be getting your students to reflect more on what they're learning. Again, this is another way to get them away from focusing on grades, 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 and into learning, 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 and develop a love of learning. And finally, if they're doing some kind of product or performance, that tends to be a project. So you want to be able to track that project and how the project develops out. So you can use a growth portfolio for that. Showcase portfolio is what you think of when you have a traditional artist who might have their paintings, and you know they have that big bag that's big and flat, and they have all of their paintings in them, and they stick them in there because that's usually representative of their best work or their favorite work or the most important work. And then that's a place also where if they've won awards and they get, you know, those paper diplomas or something, best in show, second place, third place, most promising artist, whatever, they usually will put that kind of stuff in there too. And it tends to communicate to others their aptitude for work, whether it's their discipline, how disciplined they are, or if they're learning new techniques and how they're progressing in those techniques and their ability to master those type of techniques. They could probably show like a before or after, like, oh yeah, I just learned more about shading and how to do better shading, and here's a painting I did before I learned about shading, and here's, I attempted the same exact thing, but I applied my skills of shading now, so they'll kind of do a lot of befores and afters. So again, this is the basics of showcase. And I think that growth portfolios and showcase portfolios are usually not graded portfolios. The work inside might already be graded, but you're not grading the portfolio itself. And I can take many hours telling you the story of just that portfolio assessment and the huge debates I had with some people. We wanted to do portfolios, and some people were saying, well, we need to assess the portfolio, and other people saying, no, the portfolio is the repository. It's showing growth, or it's the showcase. We're not grading the portfolio. The stuff inside is already graded. It's just there. And we never actually resolved how to do portfolios. It was pretty funny at the time. At the time, it wasn't funny. Tragedy plus time equals comedy, which is why I'm laughing at it, because I'm thinking about how silly the debates were, and we couldn't decide. So that's why you probably sometimes want to have the third type of portfolio, which is the evaluation portfolio. And here you look at what they've achieved, and then you're going to grade what they've achieved. And you want to look at the progress towards standards, any kind of standards. So again, if you're doing tasks and rubrics, then you might just grade their progress toward meeting those, doing those tasks well inside of the rubrics at whatever level of performance you're trying to get them to do. And evaluation portfolios, again, they're assembling a bunch of work because they might be applying for something. It could be if they're looking to get into, again, a lot of you are teaching high school students. So if they're looking to get into a university, you want to get them to put in their best work. And then as you look through, you can evaluate and said, okay, this is going to be good for college application, or no, you need to do this, that, this, that, that. So you're actually looking at, they're placing everything in there first, and then you're evaluating whether it's going to meet some kind of criterion so that they can be placed into a good college or into a decent job, whatever it might be, or they're applying to get onto maybe the school newspaper. You ask them to assemble a portfolio of their written work as samples so people can evaluate their work, these kind of things. So that's an evaluation portfolio. So those are the three kinds of portfolios. I had a little movie here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open this up so you can see. This is a short movie. I found it. I liked it. We're not going to watch this right now, but you might want to just, where is it? There it is. Okay. You can just open this now in YouTube and you can watch this afterwards. It's a short video, and this guy narrates how you can use portfolios as assessment portfolios. And I liked a couple of his ideas in there, and also just his website is TIE. So you please check this out later after we're done with the session, because we're already getting close to 2 hours, and I don't want to. We're pretty much at the end of things today. So I was going to ask you these questions, but I think I'm going to skip this part too. So my question here was, let's say you do a debate in class and you use debate 3, 4, 5 times during the class. Where do you think it best fits? Do you think it might, or where might you use it? Would you use it in a growth portfolio? Would you use it in a showcase portfolio? Would you use it in an evaluation portfolio? And I think I had the collaboration boards. So which type of portfolio assessment probably is best for debate and why? But again, let's not do this. I just want to skip over it and just let you think about things like that. That's really important consideration no matter what activity you decide to do. And the other activity I chose that I know most of you probably know is this KWL. What do I know about a topic? What do I want to know? What have I learned? Is this good as if you were putting this in a portfolio? Would you use a growth portfolio or showcase portfolio or an evaluation portfolio? And again, I was going to have some space for that, but I want to finish within 5 minutes here. I just want to say a couple things about putting together assessment. I really like this graphic. You have 3 choices in life when you're developing things. There's the choice of cheap, or the choice of price, and the choice of speed, and the choice of quality. Cheap, fast, and elegant. But you really only get to choose 2 because, as you can see in the center, that all 3 don't exist. So when you're making these decisions to use authentic assessment, sometimes it's going to take time, and you probably need more time for better quality, which means it's going to cost more money because you're taking more time to do it. if you try to do things quickly, then if you do it quickly for a cheap price, you're not going to get elegant. You're not going to get good quality. So be careful of this balance. My advice is take the time to make these decisions. And then when you take the time and you want good quality, it means it's not going to be cheap. It's going to, if your school complains that you're taking too long to develop some things, you just say, do you want quality or do you want speed? Because they're kind of mutually exclusive to each other. So keep that in mind as you have to plan and develop things. I really like to make this point because I've had these kind of debates with people in the past. So again, these are my outcomes for the session. I hope now you're able to define and illustrate task assessment, especially contrasting traditional assessment to authentic assessment. And you're able to talk a little bit more about the 4 types of tasks that can be assessed. Then think about rubrics and the 2 types of rubrics, and portfolio and the 3 types of portfolio assessment that you can do. And again, even though it's been 2 hours, this has really skimmed the surface of Dr. Muller's website on authentic assessment, which I highly, highly, highly recommend you take some time to look through, because again, the examples he provides are really, really fabulous. I really like them. But I do want to take time for this one, which is I have 3 questions to ask you for today, for my session today. And if you pop open the little graphic in the top right corner, you're going to see these 3 questions. And if you can answer these for me, I would be very happy, please. Think about today's session, everything we talked about, everything we did. What worked best for you and why? What would you do differently and why? And what surprised you about today's session and why? So I want to give you, right now, we're already at the 2-hour mark, but I think you might need 3, 4, 5 minutes to do this. So I'm just going to cut my mic and video while you're writing so that you don't have to listen to my voice go on and on. So I'm going to do that right now. Okay, so I got feedback from everybody. If it's okay, I'm just going to share one, not all, just one. But I appreciate this feedback. What I learned, well, I'm going to share this one first, if it comes up. It takes time. Today's session has been very useful. It tackled the topic of authentic assessment as opposed to traditional assessment. I liked it was its in-depth discussion of the topic and the polls. I got to learn about and think the kind of assessment teacher can use depends on the level of the class, as well as many other factors. And what I will say again to you is, look, it's even taken me more than 2 hours and just to cover what I would call a distilled basics of basics. And I promise you, if you go to the Mueller website, a couple of you said you would have liked to have seen some more specific examples. If you go to his website, there are so many examples there. They're all over the place there. So you'll see lots of really good, really detailed examples from him. There just wasn't time to squeeze all that in here. And I think I'm just going to leave this as a 2-hour session because it's going to be too tough to really boil this down even more because this is bare bones, and look at all the information just for the basics. Again, though, I will thank you for your participation today. As usual, I enjoyed it. Yes, I knew I would be talking a lot more in this one, but I was still able to squeeze in a few interactions, not as many as I like, but that's how it is sometimes with some topics, unless you have suggestions for doing things differently too. And I do have a couple in here that I'm going to think about. Meanwhile, I will send out certificates to everybody who came today. Probably not today, but sometime this week. And I am planning, if you have a topic that you're interested in, just email me now and I'll try to create something. I try to keep it to 90 minutes, but as you see from today, they tend to start out at 2 hours and a little bit longer. So I'm working on compacting those. I think that would be good. Please also share with your fellow teachers, ask them to come. It's nice to try out new material and have these discussions. The more the merrier, as you know. And I think I'm going to stop talking now because I'm tired and everybody else is tired. Thanks for your participation. Hope to see you in 2 weeks with 2 fresh new topics. I kind of already know I'm probably going to rework a couple of my favorites. The big one I do want to tackle, which I'll probably do in 2 weeks, is mindset. And the other one probably is going to be flow, unless you have some other suggestions. So that's all for today. I'm going to stop the recording and thank you very much and hopefully see you online again. And I wore green because it's supposed to match my logo color. Anyway, thanks everyone.
Merci. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's been very helpful.
It has indeed. Thank you, everybody. Hope you have a nice day, evening, night, etc., etc. Bye.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.